Chapter 8. We blow up some things. You thought all the things blew up? No, we found more things. Most satyrs excel at running away. Gleeson Hedge, however, was not most satyrs. He grabbed a barrel brush from his cart, yelled, "Die!" and charged the 300-pound manager. Even the automatons were too surprised to react, which probably saved Hedge's life. I grabbed the satyr's collar and dragged him backwards as the employees' first shots went wild, a barrage of bright orange discount stickers flying over our heads. I pulled Hedge down the aisle as he launched a fierce kick, overturning his shopping trolley at our enemy's feet. Another discount sticker grazed my arm with the force of an angry titaness's slap. "Careful," Macro yelled at his men. "I need Apollo in one piece, not half off." Gleeson clawed at the shelves, grabbed a demo model Macro self-lighting Molotov cocktail, buy one get one 2 free, and tossed it at the store employees with the battle cry, "Eat surplus!" Macro shrieked as the Molotov cocktail landed amid Hedge's scattered ammo boxes and, true to its advertising, burst into flames. "Up and over!" Hedge tackled me around the waist. He slung me over his shoulder like a sack of footballs and scaled the shelves in an epic display of goat climbing, leaping into the next aisle as crates of ammunition exploded behind us. We landed in a pile of rolled-up sleeping bags. "Keep moving!" Hedge yelled, as if the thought might not have occurred to me. I scrambled after him, my ears ringing. From the aisle we'd just left, I heard bangs and screams as if Macro were running across a hot pan strewn with popcorn kernels. I saw no sign of Grover. When we reached the end of the aisle, a store clerk rounded the corner, his label gun raised. "Hiya!" Hedge executed a roundhouse kick on him. "Hiya!" This was a notoriously difficult move. Even Airy sometimes fell and broke his tailbone when practicing it in his dojo. Witness the Airy So Lame video that went viral on Mount Olympus last year, and which I absolutely was not responsible for uploading. To my surprise, Coach Hedge executed it perfectly. His hoof connected with the clerk's face, knocking the automaton's head clean off. The body dropped to its knees and fell forward, wires sparking in its neck. "Wow!" Gleeson examined his hoof. "I guess that iron goat conditioning wax really works." The clerk's decapitated body gave me flashbacks to the Indianapolis bleme, who lost their fake heads with great regularity, but I had no time to dwell on the terrible past when I had such a terrible present to deal with. Behind us, Macro called, "Oh, what have you done now?" The manager stood at the far end of his lane, his clothes smeared with soot, his yellow vest peppered with so many holes it looked like a smoking piece of Swiss cheese. Yet somehow, just my luck, he appeared unharmed. The second store assistant stood behind him, apparently unconcerned that his robotic head was on fire. "Apollo!" Macro chided. "There's no point in fighting my automatons. This is a military surplus store. I have 50 more just like these in storage." I glanced at Hedge. "Let's get out of here." "Yeah." Hedge grabbed a croquet mallet from a nearby rack. 50, maybe too many even for me. We skirted the camping tents, then zigzagged through hockey heaven, trying to make our way back to the store entrance. A few aisles away, Macro was shouting orders. "Get them! I'm not going to be forced to commit suicide again!" "Again?" Hedge muttered, ducking under the arm of a hockey mannequin. "He worked for the Emperor," I panted, trying to keep up. "Old friends, but Emperor didn't trust him. Ordered his arrest. Execution." We stopped at the end of the aisle. Gleeson peeked around the corner of signs of hostiles. "So, Macro committed suicide instead?" Hedge asked. "What a moron. Why is he working for the Emperor again, if the guy wanted him killed?" I wiped the sweat from my eyes. Honestly, why did mortal bodies have to sweat so much? I imagine the Emperor brought him back to life, gave him a second chance. Romans have strange ideas about loyalty. Hedge grunted. "Speaking of which, where's Grover?" "Halfway back to the cistern if he's smart." Hedge frowned. "Nah, can't believe he'd do that." "Well," he pointed ahead, where sliding glass doors led out to the parking lot. The coach's yellow Pinto was parked tantalizingly close, which is the first time yellow, Pintos and tantalizingly have been used together in a sentence. "You ready?" We charged the doors. The doors did not cooperate. I slammed into one and bounced right off. Gleeson hammered at the glass with his croquet mallet, then tried a few Chuck Norris kicks, but even his iron goat waxed hooves didn't leave a scratch. Behind us, Macro said, "Oh dear." I turned, trying to suppress a whimper. The manager stood 20 feet away, under a whitewater raft that was suspended from the ceiling, with a sign across its prow, "Boatloads of savings." I was beginning to appreciate why the Emperor had ordered Macro arrested and executed. For such a big man, he was much too good at sneaking up on people. "Those glass doors are bomb-proof," Macro said. "We have some for sale this week in our Fallout Shelter Improvement Department, but I suppose that wouldn't do you any good." From various aisles, more yellow-vested employees converged, a dozen identical automatons, some covered in bubble wrap as if they'd just broken out of storage. They formed a rough semicircle behind Macro. I drew my bow. I fired a shot at Macro, but my hand shook so badly the arrow missed, embedding itself in an automaton's bubble-wrapped forehead with a crisp pop. The robot barely seemed to notice. Macro grimaced. You really are quite mortal, aren't you? I guess it's true what people say. Never meet your gods. They'll only disappoint you. I just hope there's enough of you left for the Emperor's magical friend to work with. Enough of me, I stammered. Magical friend? I waited for Gleason Hedge to do something clever and heroic. Surely he had a portable bazooka in the pocket of his gym shorts. Or perhaps his coach's whistle was magic. But Hedge looked as concerned and desperate as I felt, which wasn't fair. Cornered and desperate was my job. Macro cracked his knuckles. It's a shame, really. I'm much more loyal than she is, but I shouldn't complain. Once I bring you to the Emperor, I'll be rewarded. My automatons will be given a second chance as the Emperor's personal guard. After that, what do I care? The sorceress can take you into the maze and do her magic. Her magic? Hedge hefted his croquet mallet. I'll take out as many as I can, he muttered to me. You find another exit. I appreciated the sentiment. Unfortunately, I didn't think the satyr would be able to buy me much of a head start. Also, I didn't like the idea of returning to that kind, sleep-deprived cloud nymph, Melly, and informing her that her husband had been killed by a squad of bubble-wrapped robots. Oh, my mortal sympathies really were getting the better of me. Who is this sorceress? I demanded. What does she intend to do with me? Macro's smile was cold and insincere. I'd used that smile myself many times in the old days. Whenever some Greek town prayed to me to save them from a plague and I had to break the news, gee, I'm sorry, but I caused that plague because I don't like you. Have a nice day. You'll see soon enough, Macro promised. I didn't believe her when she said you'd walk right into our trap, but here you are. She predicted that you wouldn't be able to resist the burning maze. Ah, well, military madness team members, kill the satyr and apprehend the former god. The automatons shuffled forward. At the same moment, a blur of green, red and brown near the ceiling caught my eye. A satyr-like shape leaping from the top of the nearest aisle, swinging off a fluorescent light fixture and landing in the white water raft above Macro's head. Before I could shout, Grover, Underwood! The raft landed on top of Macro and his minions, burying them under a boatload of savings. Grover leapt free, a paddle in his hand, and yelled, Come on! The confusion allowed us a few moments to flee, but with the exit doors locked, we could only run deeper into the store. Nice one. Hedge slapped Grover on the back as we raced through the camouflage department. I knew you wouldn't leave us. Yes, but there's no nature anywhere in here, Grover complained. No plants, no soil, no natural light. How are we supposed to fight in these conditions? Guns, Hedge suggested. That whole part of the store is on fire, Grover said, thanks to a Molotov cocktail and some ammo boxes. Curses, said the coach. We passed a display of martial arts weapons, and Hedge's eyes lit up. He quickly exchanged his croquet mallet for a pair of nunchaka. Now we're talking. You guys want some shurikens or kusarigami? I want to run away, Grover said, shaking his boat paddle. Coach, you have to stop thinking about full frontal assaults. You have a family. Don't you think I know that? Coach growled. We tried settling down with the McLeans in L.A. Look how well that turned out. I guess there was a story there. Why they had come from L.A., why Hedge sounded so bitter about it. But while fleeing from enemies in a surplus store was perhaps not the best time to talk about it. I suggest we find another exit, I said. We can run away and argue about ninja weapons at the same time. This compromise seemed to satisfy them both. We sped past a display of inflatable swimming pools. How were those military surplus? Then turned a corner and saw in front of us, at the far rear corner of the building, a set of double doors labelled Employees Only. Grover and Hedge charged ahead, leaving me gasping in the wake. From somewhere nearby, Macro's voice called, You can't escape, Apollo. I've already called the horse. He'll be here any minute. The horse? Why did that term send a B major chord of terror vibrating through my bones? I searched my jumbled memories for a clear answer, but came up empty. My first thought, maybe the horse was a nom de guerre. Perhaps the Emperor employed an evil wrestler who wore a black satin cape, shiny spandex shorts, and a horse-head shell-shaped helmet. My second thought, why did Macro get to call for backup when I could not? Demigod communications had been magically sabotaged for months. Phones short-circuited, computers melted, iris messages and magical scrolls failed to work. Yet our enemies seem to have no trouble texting each other messages like, "Apollo, my place, where you at? Help me kill him." It wasn't fair. Fair would have been me getting my immortal powers back and blasting our enemies into tiny pieces. We burst through the employees-only doors. Inside was a storage room, loading bay filled with more bubble-wrapped automatons, all standing silent and lifeless like the crowd at one of Hestia's housewarming parties. She may be the goddess of the family hearth, but the lady has no clue about how to throw a party. Gleason and Grover ran past the robots and began tugging at the rolling metal garage door that sealed off the loading dock. Locked! Hedge whacked the door with his nunchucker. I peered through the tiny plastic windows of the employee doors. Macro and his minions were barreling in our direction. Run or stay, I asked. We're about to be cornered again. Apollo, what have you got? Hedge demanded. What do you mean? What's the ace up your sleeve? I did the Molotov cocktail, Grover dropped the boat. It's your turn. Godly fire? Maybe? We could use some godly fire. I have 0 godly fire up my sleeves. We stay, Grover decided. He tossed me his boat paddle. Apollo, block those doors. But just keep Macro out. Grover must have been taking assertiveness lessons from Meg. I jumped to comply. Coach, Grover continued, can you play a song of opening for the loading dock door? Hedge grunted. Haven't done one of those in years, but I'll try. What'll you be doing? Grover studied the dormant automatons. Something my friend Annabeth taught me. Hurry. I slipped the paddle through the door handles and then lugged over a tevable pole and braced it against the door. Hedge began to trill a tune on his coach's whistle, The Entertainer by Scott Joplin. I'd never thought of the whistle as a musical instrument. Coach Hedge's performance did nothing to change my mind. Meanwhile, Grover ripped the plastic off the nearest automaton. He rapped his knuckles against his forehead, which made a hollow clang. Celestial bronze, all right, Grover decided. This might work. What are you going to do? I demanded. Melt them down for weapons? No, activate them to work for us. They won't help us. They belong to Macro. Speaking of the Praetor, Macro pushed against the doors, rattling the paddle and the tevable pole brace. Oh, come on, Apollo, stop being difficult. Grover pulled the bubble wrap off another automaton. During the Battle of Manhattan, he said, when we were fighting Kronos, Annabeth told us about an override command written into the firmware of automatons. That's only for public statutory in Manhattan, I said. Every god who's any god knows that. You can't expect these things to respond to command sequence, Daedalus 23. Instantly, as in a scary episode of Doctor Who, the plastic-wrapped automatons snapped to attention and turned to face me. Yes, Grover yelled gleefully. I did not feel so gleeful. I just activated a room full of metal temp workers who were more likely to kill me than obey me. I had no idea how Annabeth Chase had figured out that the Daedalus command could be used on any automaton. Then again, she'd been able to redesign my palace on Mount Olympus with perfect acoustics and surround sound speakers in the bathroom, so her cleverness shouldn't have surprised me. Coach Hedge kept trilling Scott Joplin. The loading bay door didn't move. Macro and his men banged against my makeshift barricade, nearly making me lose my grip on the tevable pole. Apollo, talk to the automatons, Grover said. They're waiting for your orders now. Tell them, begin plan Thermopylae. I didn't like being reminded of Thermopylae. So many brave and attractive Spartans had died in that battle defending Greece from the Persians. But as I was told, I did begin plan Thermopylae. At that moment, Macro and his 12 servants busted through the doors, snapping the paddle, knocking aside the tevable pole and launching me into the midst of my new metal acquaintances. Macro stumbled to a halt, 6 minions fanning out on either side. What's this, Apollo? You can't activate my automatons. You haven't paid for them. Military madness team members, apprehend Apollo, tear the satyrs apart and stop that infernal whistling. 2 things saved us from instant death. First, Macro had made the mistake of issuing too many orders at once. As any maestro can tell you, a conductor should never simultaneously order the violins to speed up, the timpani to soften, and the brass to crescendo. You will end up with a symphonic train wreck. Macro's poor soldiers were left to decide for themselves whether they should first apprehend me, or tear apart the satyrs, or stop the whistling. Personally, I would have gone after the whistler with extreme prejudice. The other thing that saved us, rather than listening to Macro, our new temp worker friends began executing Plan Thermopylae. They shuffled forward, linking their arms and surrounding Macro and his companions, who awkwardly tried to get around their robotic colleagues and bumped into each other in confusion. The scene was reminding me more of a Hestia housewarming by the second. "Stop this!" Macro shrieked. "I order you to stop." This only added to the confusion. Macro's faithful minions froze in their tracks, allowing our Daedalus-operated dudes to encircle Macro's group. "No, not you!" Macro yelled to his minions. "You all don't stop! You keep fighting!" Which did nothing to clarify the situation. The Daedalus dudes encircled their comrades, squeezing them in a massive group hug. Despite Macro's size and strength, he was trapped in the centre, squirming and shoving uselessly. "No, I can't!" He spat bubble wrap from his mouth. "Help! The horse can't see me like this!" From deep in their chests, the Daedalus dudes began to emit a hum, like engines stuck in the wrong gear. Steam rose from the seams of their necks. I backed away, as one does when a group of robots starts to steam. "Grover, what exactly is Plan Thermopylae?" The satyr gulped. They're supposed to stand their ground so we can retreat." "Then why are they steaming?" I asked. "Also, why are they starting to glow red?" "Oh dear." Grover chewed his lower lip. "They may have confused Plan Thermopylae with Plan Petersburg." "Which means?" "They may be about to sacrifice themselves in a fiery explosion." "Coach!" I yelled. "Whistle better!" I threw myself at the loading bay door, working my fingers under the bottom and lifting with all my pathetic mortal strength. I whistled along with Hedge's frantic tune. I even tap danced a little, since that is well known to speed up musical spells. Behind us, Macro shrieked, "Hot! Hot!" My clothes felt uncomfortably warm, as if I was sitting at the edge of a bonfire. After our experience with the wall of flames in the labyrinth, I did not want to take my chances with a group hug explosion in this small room. "Lift!" I yelled. "Whistle!" Grover joined in our desperate Joplin performance. Finally, the loading bay door began to budge, creaking in protest as we raised it a few inches off the floor. Macro's shrieking became unintelligible. The humming and heat reminded me of that moment just before my sun chariot would take off, blasting into the sky in a triumph of solar power. "Go!" I yelled to the satyrs. "Both of you, roll under!" I thought that was quite heroic of me, though, to be honest, I half expected them to insist, "Oh no, please, gods first." No such courtesy. The satyrs shimmied under the door, then held it from the other side while I tried to wriggle under the gap. Alas, I found myself stymied by my own accursed love handles. In short, I got stuck. "Apollo, come on!" Grover yelled. "I'm trying!" "Suck it in, boy!" screamed the coach. I'd never had a personal trainer before. Gods simply don't need someone yelling at them, shaming them into working harder, and honestly, who would want that job? Knowing you could get zapped by lightning the first time you chided your client into doing an extra 5 push-ups. This time, however, I was glad to be yelled at. The coach's exhortations gave me the extra burst of motivation I needed to squeeze my flabby mortal body through the gap. No sooner had I got to my feet than Grover yelled, "Dive!" We leapt off the edge of the loading dock as the steel door, which was apparently not bomb-proof, exploded behind us. Chapter 9. Collect call from Horse. "Do you accept the charges?" "Nay." "Oh, villainy. Please explain to me why I always end up falling into dumpsters. I must confess, however, that this dumpster saved my life. Macro's military madness went up in a chain of explosions that shook the desert, rattling the flaps of the foul-smelling metal box that sheltered us. Sweating and shivering, barely able to breathe, the two satyrs and I huddled amid trash bags and listened to the pitter-patter of debris raining from the sky, an unexpected downpour of wood, plaster, glass, and sporting equipment. After what seemed like years, I was about to risk speaking, something like, "Get me out of here or I'm going to vomit," when Grover clamped his hand over my mouth. I could barely see him in the dark, but he shook his head urgently, his eyes wide with alarm. Coach Hedge also looked tense. His nose quivered, as if he smelled something even worse than the garbage. Then I heard the clop, clop, clop of hooves on tarmac as they approached our hiding place. A deep voice grumbled, "Well, this is just perfect." An animal's muzzle snuffled the rim of our dumpster, perhaps smelling for survivors. For us. I tried not to weep or wet my pants. I succeeded at one of those. I'll let you decide which. The flaps of the dumpster remained closed. Perhaps the garbage and the burning warehouse masked our scent. "Hey, Big C," said the same deep voice. "Yeah, it's me." From the lack of audible response, I guessed the newcomer was talking on the phone. "Nah, the place is gone. I don't know. Macro must have..." He paused, as if the person on the other end had launched into a tirade. "I know," said the newcomer. "Could have been a false alarm, but, nuts. Human police are on the way." A moment after he said that, I heard the faint sound of sirens in the distance. "I could search the area," the newcomer suggested. "Maybe check those ruins up the hill." Hedge and Grover exchanged a worried look. Surely the ruins meant our sanctuary, currently housing Melly, Baby Hedge and Meg. "I know you think you took care of it," said the newcomer, "but look, that place is still dangerous, I'm telling you." This time I could hear a faint, tinny voice, raging on the other end of the line. "Okay, C," said the newcomer. "Yes, Jupiter's jumpers, calm down. Fine, I'm on my way back. His exasperated sigh told me the call must have ended. Kid's gonna give me colic, the speaker grumbled aloud to himself. Something slammed into the side of our dumpster, right next to my face. Then the hooves galloped away. Several minutes passed before I felt safe enough to even look at the two satyrs. We silently agreed that we had to get out of the dumpster before we died of suffocation, heat stroke, or the smell of my pants. Outside, the alley was littered with smoking chunks of twisted metal and plastic. The warehouse itself was a blackened shell, flames still swirling within, adding more columns of smoke to the ash-choked night sky. Who was that? Grover asked. He smelled like a guy on a horse, but... Coach Hedges' nunchucker clattered in his hands. Maybe a centaur? No. I put my hand on the dented metal side of the dumpster, which now bore the unmistakable impression of a shod hoof. He was a horse. A talking horse. The satyrs stared at me. All horses talk, Grover said. They just talk in horse. Wait. Hedge frowned at me. You mean you understood the horse? Yes, I said. That horse spoke in English. They waited for me to explain, but I couldn't make myself say more. Now that we were out of immediate danger, now that my adrenaline was ebbing, I found myself gripped by a cold, heavy despair. If I'd harboured any last hopes that I might be wrong about the enemy we were facing, those hopes had been torpedoed. Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus. Strangely enough, that name could have applied to several famous ancient Romans, but the master of Naevius Sutorius Macro, Big C, Neos Helios, the only Roman emperor ever to possess a talking horse. That can mean only one person. One terrible person. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles pulsed against the fronds of the nearest palm trees. We need to get out of here, I said. Gleason stared at the wreckage of the surplus store. Yeah, let's go round the front, see if our car survived. I just wish I'd got some camping supplies out of this deal. We got something much worse. I took a shaky breath. We got the identity of the third emperor. The explosion hadn't scathed the coach's yellow 1979 Ford Pinto. Of course it hadn't. Such a hideous car couldn't be destroyed by anything less than a worldwide apocalypse. I sat in the back, wearing a new pair of hot pink camo pants we'd salvaged from the army surplus wreckage. I was in such a stupor that I barely remember going through the drive-through lane of Enchiladas del Rey and picking up enough combo plates to feed several dozen nature spirits. Back at the hilltop ruins, we convened a council of the cacti. The cistern was packed with desert plant dryads, Joshua tree, prickly pear, aloe vera, and many more, all dressed in bristly clothes and doing their best not to poke each other. Melly fussed over Gleason, 1 minute showering him with kisses and telling him how brave he was, the next minute punching him and accusing him of wanting her to raise baby Hedge by herself as a widow. The infant, whose name I learned was Chuck, was awake and none too happy, kicking his little hooves into his father's stomach as Gleason tried to hold him, tugging Hedge's goatee with his chubby little fists. On the bright side, Hedge told Melly, we got enchiladas and I scored some awesome nunchaka. Melly gazed heavenward, perhaps wishing she could go back to her simple life as an unmarried cloud. As for Meg McCaffrey, she had regained consciousness and looked as well as she ever looked, just slightly greasier thanks to the first aid ministrations of aloe vera. Meg sat at the edge of the pool, trailing her bare feet in the water and stealing glances at Joshua Tree, who stood nearby, brooding handsomely in his khakis. I asked Meg how she was feeling, because I am nothing if not thoughtful, but she waved me off, insisting she was fine. I think she was just embarrassed by my presence as she tried to discreetly ogle Joshua, which made me roll my eyes. Girl, I see you, I felt like saying. You are not subtle, and we really need to have a talk about crushing on dryads. I didn't want her to order me to slap myself, however, so I kept my mouth shut. Grover distributed enchilada plates to everyone. He ate nothing himself, a sure sign of how nervous he felt, but paced the circumference of the pool, tapping his fingers against his reed pipes. Guys, he announced, we've got problems. I would not have imagined Grover Underwood as a leader. Nevertheless, as he spoke, all the other nature spirits gave him their full attention. Even baby Chuck quietened down, tilting his head towards Grover's voice, as if it was something interesting and possibly worth kicking. Grover related everything that had happened to us since we'd met up in Indianapolis. He recounted our days in the labyrinth, the pits and poison lakes, the sudden wave of fire, the flock of Strixes and the spiral ramp that had led us up to these ruins. The dryads looked around nervously, as if imagining the cistern filled with demonic owls. You sure we're safe? Asked a short, plump girl with a lilting accent and red flowers in her hair, or perhaps sprouting from her hair. I don't know, Reba. Grover glanced at Meg and me. This is Rebisha, guys. Reba for short. She's a transplant from Argentina. I waved politely. I'd never met an Argentinian cactus before, but I had a soft spot for Buenos Aires. You haven't been tangoed until you've tangoed with a Greek god at La Ventana. Grover continued. I don't think that exit from the maze has ever been there before. It's sealed now. I think the labyrinth was helping us, bringing us home. Helping us? Prickly Pear looked up from her cheese enchiladas. The same labyrinth harbouring fires that are destroying the whole state. The same labyrinth we've been exploring for months, trying to find the source of those fires. With no luck. The same labyrinth that swallowed a dozen of our search parties. What does it look like when the labyrinth isn't helping us? The other dryads grumbled in agreement. Some bristled literally. Grover braced his hands for calm. I know we're all worried and frustrated, but the burning maze isn't the entire labyrinth. And at least now we have some idea why the Emperor set it up the way he did. It's because of Apollo. Dozens of cactus spirits turned to stare at me. Just to clarify, I said in a small voice, it's not my fault. Tell them, Grover. Tell your very nice, very spiny friends it isn't my fault. Coach Hedge grunted. Well, it kind of is. Macro said the maze was a trap for you, probably because of the oracle thingy you're looking for. Mellie's gaze ping-ponged between her husband and me. Macro? Oracle thingy? I explained how Zeus had me travelling around the country, freeing ancient oracles as part of my penance, because that's just the sort of horrible father he was. Hedge then recounted our fun shopping expedition to Macro's military madness, when he got sidetracked talking about the various types of landmines he'd found. Grover intervened. So, we exploded Macro, Grover summed up, who was a Roman follower of this emperor, and he mentioned some kind of sorceress who wants to, I don't know, do some evil magic on Apollo, I guess, and she's helping the emperor. And we think they put the next oracle, the Sibyl of Eritrea, I said. Right, Grover agreed. We think they put her at the centre of the maze as some sort of bait for Apollo. Also, there's a talking horse. Mellie's face clouded over, which was unsurprising since she was a cloud. All horses talk. Grover explained that what we'd heard in the dumpster. Then he backed up and explained why we'd been in a dumpster. Then he explained how I'd wet myself and that was why I was wearing hot pink camo pants. Oh, all the dryads nodded, as if this was the real question that had been bothering them. Can we get back to the problem at hand, I pleaded. We have a common cause. You want the fires stopped, and I have a quest to free the Eritrean Sibyl. Both those things require us to find the heart of the maze. That's where we'll find the source of the flames. And the Sibyl. I know it. Meg studied me intently, as if trying to decide what embarrassing order she should give me. Jump in the pool, hug Prickly Pear, find a shirt that matches your camo pants? Tell me about the horse, she said. Order received, I had no choice. His name is Incitatus. And he talks, Meg said, like in a way humans can understand. Yes, though normally he only speaks to the Emperor. Don't ask me how he talks, or where he came from, I don't know. He's a magical horse. The Emperor trusts him, probably more than he trusts anyone. Back when the Emperor ruled ancient Rome, he dressed, in Incitatus, in senatorial purple. Even tried to make him a consul, people thought the Emperor was crazy. But he was never crazy. Meg leaned over the pool, hunching her shoulders as if withdrawing into her mental shell. With Meg, emperors were always a touchy subject. Raised in Nero's household, though the terms abused and gaslighted were more accurate, she'd betrayed me to Nero at Camp Half-Blood before returning to me in Indianapolis, a subject we'd skirted without really addressing it for a while. I did not blame the poor girl, truly, but getting her to trust my friendship, to trust anyone after her stepfather, Nero, was like training a wild squirrel to eat out of one's hand. Any loud noise was liable to cause her to flee or bite, or both. I realise that's not a fair comparison. Meg bites much harder than a wild squirrel. Finally, she said, that line from the prophecy, the master of the swift white horse. I nodded. Incitatus belongs to the emperor. Or, perhaps, belong isn't the right word. Incitatus is the right-hand horse of the man who now claims the western United States. Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. This was the Dryad's cue for a collective gasp of horror, and perhaps some ominous background music. Instead, blank faces greeted me. The only ominous background sound was baby Chuck chewing the styrofoam lid of his father's No. 3 dinner special. This Gaius person, said Meg. Is he famous? I stared at the dark waters of the pool, almost wished Meg would order me to jump in and drown, or force me to wear a shirt that matched my hot pink camo pants. Either punishment would have been easier than answering her question. The Emperor is better known by his childhood nickname, I said, which he despises, by the way. History remembers him as Caligula. Chapter 10. Cute kid you got there, with the itty-bitty boots and murderous grin. Do you know the name Caligula, dear reader? If not, consider yourself lucky. All around the cistern, cactus dryads puffed out their spikes. Mellie's lower half dissolved into mist. Even baby Chuck coughed up a piece of styrofoam. Caligula? Coach Hedge's eye twitched the same way it had when Mellie threatened to take away his ninja weapons. Are you sure? I wish I wasn't. I wished I could announce that the third emperor was kindly old Marcus Aurelius or noble Hadrian or bumbling Claudius, but Caligula. Even for those who knew little about him, the name Caligula conjured the darkest, most depraved images. His reign was bloodier and more infamous than Nero's, who had grown up in awe of his wicked great-uncle Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus. Caligula, a byword for murder, torture, madness, excess. Caligula, the villainous tyrant against whom all other villainous tyrants were measured. Caligula, who had a worse branding problem than the Edsel, the Hindenburg and the Chicago Black Sox put together. Grover shuddered. I've always hated that name. What does it mean anyway? Satyr killer? Blood drinker? Booties, I said. Joshua's shaggy olive hair stood straight up, which Meg seemed to find fascinating. Booties? Joshua glanced around the cistern, perhaps wondering if he'd missed the joke. No one was laughing. Yes. I could still remember how cute little Caligula had looked in his miniature legionnaire's outfit when he accompanied his father, Germanicus, on military campaigns. Why were sociopaths always so adorable as children? His father's soldiers gave Caligula the nickname when he was a child, I said. He wore teeny-weeny legionnaire's boots, Caligay, and they thought that was hysterical, so they called him Caligula, little boots, or baby shoes, or booties. Pick your translation. Prickly Pear stabbed her fork into her enchiladas. I don't care if the guy's name is Snookums McCuddleface. How do we beat him and get our lives back to normal? The other cacti grumbled and nodded. I was starting to suspect that prickly pears were the natural agitators of the cactus world. Get enough of them together and they would start a revolution and overthrow the animal kingdom. We have to be careful, I warned. Caligula is a master of trapping his enemies. The old saying, give them enough rope to hang themselves, that was made for Caligula. He delights in his reputation as a madman, but it's just a cover. He's quite sane. He's also completely amoral, even worse than... I stopped myself. I'd been about to say worse than Nero, but how could I make such a claim in front of Meg, whose entire childhood had been poisoned by Nero and his alter ego, the Beast? Careful, Meg, Nero would always say. Don't misbehave or you'll wake the Beast. I love you dearly, but the Beast... Well, I would hate to see you do something wrong and get hurt. How could I quantify such villainy? Anyway, I said, Caligula is smart, patient and paranoid. If this burning maze is some elaborate trap, part of some bigger plan of his, it won't be easy to shut down, and beating him, even finding him, will be a challenge. I was tempted to add, perhaps we don't want to find him, perhaps we should run away. That wouldn't work for the dryads. They were rooted, quite literally, to the land in which they grew. Transplants like Reba were rare. Few nature spirits could survive being potted and transported to a new environment. Even if every dryad had managed to flee the fires of Southern California, thousands more would stay and burn. Grover shuddered. If half the stuff I've heard about Caligula is true... He paused, apparently realising that everyone was watching him, gauging how much they should panic based on Grover's reactions. I, for one, did not want to be in the middle of a room filled with cacti that were running around screaming. Fortunately, Grover kept his cool. Nobody is unbeatable, he declared. Not titans, giants or gods, and definitely not some Roman emperor named Booties. This guy is causing Southern California to wither and die. He's behind the droughts, the heat, the fires. We have to find a way to stop him. Apollo, how did Caligula die the first time? I tried to remember. As usual, my mortal hard drive of a brain was shot full of holes, but I seem to recall a dark tunnel packed with Praetorian guards crowding around the emperor, their knives flashing and glistening with blood. His own guards killed him, I said, which I'm sure has made him even more paranoid. Macro mentioned that the emperor kept changing his personal guard. First automatons replaced the praetors, then he changed them again to mercenaries and strixes and big ears. I don't know what that means. One of the dryads huffed indignantly. I guess she was cholla, since she looked like a cholla plant. Wispy white hair, a fuzzy white beard and large paddle-shaped ears covered with bristles. No decent big-eared person would work for such a villain. What about other weaknesses? The Emperor must have some. Yeah, Coach Hedge chimed in. Is he scared of goats? Is he allergic to cactus sap? Aloe Vera asked hopefully. Not that I know of, I said. The assembled dryads looked disappointed. You said you got a prophecy in Indiana, Joshua asked. Any clues there? His tone was sceptical, which I could understand. A Hoosier prophecy just doesn't have the same ring to it as a Delphic prophecy. I have to find the Westwood Palace, I said, which must be Caligula's base. No one knows where that is, grumbled Pear. Perhaps it was my imagination, but Melly and Gleeson seemed to exchange an anxious look. I waited for them to say something else, but they did not. Also, from the prophecy, I continued, I have to wrest from him the crossword speaker's breath, meaning, I think, that I have to free the Eritrean Sibyl from his control. Does this Sibyl like crosswords? Reba asked. I like crosswords. The oracle gave her prophecies in the form of word puzzles, I explained, like crosswords or acrostics. The prophecy also talks about Grover bringing us here, and a lot of terrible things that will happen at Camp Jupiter in the next few days. The new moon, Meg muttered, coming very soon. Yes, I tried to contain my annoyance. Meg seemed to want me to be in 2 places at once, which would have been no problem for Apollo the god. For Lester the human, I could barely manage being in 1 place at a time. There's another line, Grover remembered. Walk the path in thine own enemy's boots. Could that have something to do with Caligula's booties? I imagined my ginormous 16-year-old feet crammed into a Roman toddler's military-issue leather baby shoes. My toes began to throb. I hope not, I said, but if we could free the Sibyl from the maze, I'm sure she would help us. I'd like to have more guidance before I charge off to confront Caligula in person. Other things I would have liked. My godly powers back, the entire firearms department of Macro's military madness, locked and loaded in the hands of a demigod army, an apology letter from my father, Zeus, promising never again to turn me into a human, and a bath. But as they say, Lesters can't be choosers. That brings us back to where we started, Joshua said. You need the oracle freed. We need the fires shut off. To do that, we need to get through the maze, but nobody knows how. Gleeson Hedge cleared his throat. Maybe somebody does. Never before had so many cacti stared at a satyr. Cholla stroked her wispy white beard. Who is this somebody? Hedge turned to his wife, as if to say, all yours, sweetie. Melly spent a few more microseconds pondering the night sky, and possibly her former life as a nebulous bachelorette. Most of you know we've been living with the McLeans, she said, as in Piper McLean, I explained, daughter of Aphrodite. I remembered her, one of the 7 demigods who had sailed aboard the Argo II. In fact, I'd been hoping to call on her and her boyfriend, Jason Grace, while I was in Southern California to see if they would defeat the Emperor and free the Oracle for me. Wait, scratch that. I meant, of course, that I hoped they would help me do those things. Melly nodded. I was Mr. McLean's personal assistant. Gleeson was a full-time stay-at-home father doing a great job. I was, wasn't I? Gleeson agreed, giving baby Chuck the chain of his nunchucker to T-Von. Until everything went wrong, Melly said with a sigh. Meg McCaffrey tilted her head. What do you mean? Long story, said the cloud nymph, in a tone that implied, I could tell you, but then I'd have to turn into a storm cloud and cry a lot and zap you with lightning and kill you. The point is, a couple of weeks ago, Piper had a dream about the burning maze. She thought she'd found a way to reach the centre. She went exploring with that boy Jason. That boy. My finely tuned senses told me Melly was not happy with Jason Grace, son of Jupiter. When they came back, Melly paused, her lower half swirling in a corkscrew of cloud stuff. They said they had failed, but I don't think that's the whole story. Piper hinted that they had encountered something down there that rattled them. The stone walls of the cistern seemed to creak and shift in the cooling night air, as if sympathetically vibrating with the word rattled. I thought of my dream about the Sibyl in fiery chains, apologising to someone after delivering terrible news. I am sorry. I would spare you if I could. I would spare her. Had she been addressing Jason or Piper, or both of them? If so, and if they had actually found the oracle? We need to talk to those demigods, I decided. Melly lowered her head. I can't take you. Going back, it would break my heart. Hedge shifted baby Chuck to his other arm. Maybe I could. Melly shot him a warning look. Yeah, I can't go either, Hedge muttered. I'll take you, Grover volunteered, though he looked more exhausted than ever. I know where the McLean house is, just maybe we can wait until the morning? A sense of relief washed over the assembled dryads. Their spikes relaxed. The chlorophyll came back into their complexions. Grover may not have solved their problems, but he had given them hope. At the very least, a sense that we could do something. I gazed at the circle of hazy orange sky above the cistern. I thought about the fires blazing to the west, and what might be going on up north at Camp Jupiter. Sitting at the bottom of a shaft in Palm Springs, unable to help the Roman demigods or even know what was happening to them. I could empathise with the dryads, rooted in place, watching in despair as the wildfires got closer and closer. I didn't want to quash the dryads' newfound hopes, but I felt compelled to say, there's more. Your sanctuary might not be safe for much longer. I told them what Incitatus had said to Caligula on the phone, and no, I never thought I would be reporting on an eavesdropped conversation between a talking horse and a dead Roman emperor. Aloe Vera trembled, shaking several highly medicinal triangle spikes from her hair. How could they know about Aphalus? They've never bothered us here. Grover winced. I don't know, guys, but the horse did seem to imply that Caligula was the one who had destroyed it years ago. He said something like, I know you think you took care of it, but that place is still dangerous. Joshua's bark brown face turned even darker. Doesn't make sense. Even we don't know what this place was. A house, Meg said. A big house on stilts. These cisterns, they were support columns. Geothermal cooling. Water supply. The dryads bristled all over again. They said nothing, waiting for Meg to continue. She drew in her wet feet, making her look even more like a nervous squirrel ready to spring away. I remembered how she'd wanted to leave here as soon as we arrived, how she'd warned it wasn't safe. I recalled one line of the prophecy we hadn't yet discussed. Demeter's daughter finds her ancient roots. Meg, I said, as gently as I could, how do you know this place? Her expression turned tense, but defiant, as if she wasn't sure whether to burst into tears or fight me. Because it was my home, she said. My dad built Aphalus. Chapter 11. No touchy the god, unless your visions are good, and you wash your hands. You don't do that. You don't just announce that your dad built a mysterious house on a sacred spot for dryads, then get up and leave without an explanation. So, of course, that's what Meg did. See you in the morning, she announced, to no one in particular. She trudged up the ramp, still barefoot despite traipsing past 20 different species of cactus, and slipped into the dark. Grover looked around at his assembled comrades. Well, good meeting, everybody. He promptly fell over, snoring before he hit the ground. Aloe Vera gave me a concerned glance. Should I go after Meg? She might need more allowed goo. I'll check on her, I promised. The nature spirits began cleaning up their dinner trash. Dryads are very conscientious about that sort of thing, while I went in search of Meg McCaffrey. I found her 5 feet off the ground, perched on the rim of a furthest brick cylinder, facing inward and staring into the shaft below. Judging from the warm strawberry fragrance wafting from the cracks in the stone, I guessed this was the same well she'd used to exit the labyrinth. You're making me nervous, I said. Would you come down? No, she said. Of course not, I muttered. I climbed up, despite the fact that scaling walls really wasn't in my skill set. Oh, who am I kidding? In my present state, I don't have a skill set. I joined Meg on the edge, dangling my feet over the abyss from which she'd escaped. Had it really been only this morning? I couldn't see the net of strawberry plants below in the shadows, but their smell was powerful and exotic in the desert setting. Strange how a common thing can become uncommon in a new environment. Or, in my case, how an uncommonly amazing god can become so very common. The night sapped the colour from Meg's clothes, making her look like a grey-scale traffic light. Her runny nose glistened. Behind the grimy lenses of her glasses, her eyes were wet. She twisted one old ring, then the other, as if adjusting knobs on an old-fashioned radio. We'd had a long day. The silence between us felt comfortable, and I wasn't sure I could tolerate any further scary information about our Hoosier prophecy. On the other hand, I needed explanations. Before I went to sleep in this place again, I wanted to know how safe or unsafe it was, and whether I might wake up with a talking horse in my face. My nerves were shot. I considered throttling my young master and yelling, "Tell me now!" But I decided that might not be sensitive to her feelings. Would you like to talk about it? I asked gently. No. Not a huge surprise. Even under the best of circumstances, Meg and conversation were awkward acquaintances. If Aphalus is the place mentioned in the prophecy, I said, your ancient roots, then it might be important to know about it so we can stay alive. Meg looked over. She didn't order me to leap into the strawberry pit or even to shut up. Instead, she said, "Here," and grabbed my wrist. I had become used to waking visions, being yanked backwards down memory lane whenever godly experiences overloaded my mortal neurons. This was different. Rather than my own past, I found myself plunged into Meg McCaffrey's, seeing her memories from her point of view. I stood in one of the greenhouses before the plants grew wild. Well-ordered rows of new cactus pups lined the metal shelves, each clay pot fitted with a digital thermometer and moisture gauge. Misting hoses and grow lights hovered overhead. The air was warm, but pleasantly so, and smelled of freshly turned earth. Wet gravel crunched under my feet as I followed my father on his rounds. Meg's father, I mean. From my vantage point as a tiny girl, I saw him smiling down at me. As Apollo, I'd met him before in other visions, a middle-aged man with dark curly hair and a broad freckled nose. I'd witnessed him in New York, giving Meg a red rose from her mother, Demeter. I'd also seen his dead body splayed on the steps of Grand Central Station, his chest a ruin of knife or claw marks on the day Nero became Meg's stepfather. In this memory of the greenhouse, Mr. McCaffrey didn't look much younger than in those other visions. The emotions I sensed from Meg told me she was about 5 years old, the same age she'd been when she and her father wound up in New York. But Mr. McCaffrey looked so much happier in this scene, so much more at ease. As Meg gazed into her father's face, I was overwhelmed by her pure joy and contentment. She was with Daddy. Life was wonderful. Mr. McCaffrey's green eyes sparkled. He picked up a potted cactus pup and knelt to show Meg. I call this one Hercules, he said, because he can withstand anything. He flexed his arm and said, "Urgh," which sent little Meg into a fit of giggles. "Hercules," she said, "show me more plants." Mr. McCaffrey set Hercules back on the shelf, then held up one finger like a magician. "Watch this." He dug into the pocket of his denim shirt and presented his cupped fist to Meg. "Try to open it," he said. Meg pulled at his fingers. "I can't." "You can. You're very strong. Try really hard." "Urgh," said little Meg. This time she managed to open his hand, revealing 7 hexagonal seeds, each the size of a nickel. Inside their thick green skins, the seeds glowed faintly, making them look like a fleet of tiny UFOs. "Ooh," said Meg. "Can I eat them?" Her father laughed. No, sweetheart. These are very special seeds. Our family has been trying to produce seeds like this for," he whistled softly, "a long time. And when we plant them..." "What?" Meg asked breathlessly. "They will be very special," her dad promised, "even stronger than Hercules." "Plant them now." Her father ruffled her hair. "Not yet, Meg. They're not ready, but when it's time, I'll need your help. We'll plant them together. Will you promise to help me?" "I promise," she said, with all the solemnity of her 5-year-old heart. The scene shifted. Meg padded barefoot into the beautiful living room of a phallus, where her father stood facing a wall of curved glass, overlooking the nighttime city lights of Palm Springs. He was talking on the phone, his back to Meg. She was supposed to be asleep, but something had woken her. Maybe a bad dream, maybe the sense that Daddy was upset. "No, I don't understand," he was saying into the phone. "You have no right. This property isn't..." "Yes, but my research can't..." "That's impossible." Meg crept forward. She loved being in the living room, not just for the pretty view, but for the way the polished hardwood felt against her bare feet, smooth and cool and silky, like she was gliding across a living sheet of ice. She loved the plants Daddy kept on the shelves and in giant pots all around the room, cacti blooming in dozens of colours, Joshua trees that formed living columns, holding up the roof, growing into the ceiling and spreading across it in a web of fuzzy branches and green spiky clusters. Meg was too young to understand that Joshua trees weren't supposed to do that. It seemed completely reasonable to her that vegetation would weave together to help form the house. Meg also loved the big circular well in the centre of the room, the cistern, Daddy called it, railed off for safety, but so wonderful for how it cooled the whole house and made the place feel safe and anchored. Meg loved to race down the ramp and dip her feet in the cool water of the pool at the bottom, though Daddy always said, "Don't soak too long, you might turn into a plant." Most of all, she loved the big desk where Daddy worked, the trunk of a mesquite tree that grew straight up through the floor and plunged back down again, like the coil of a sea serpent breaching the waves, leaving just enough of an arc to form the piece of furniture. The top of the trunk was smooth and level, a perfect work surface. Tree hollows provided cubby holes for storage. Leafy sprigs curved up from the desktop, making a frame to hold Daddy's computer monitor. Meg had once asked if he'd hurt the tree when he carved the desk out of it, but Daddy had chuckled. "No, sweetheart, I would never hurt the tree. Mesquite offered to shape herself into a desk for me." This, too, did not seem unusual to 5-year-old Meg, calling a tree she, talking it to it the way you would speak to a person. Tonight, though, Meg didn't feel so comfortable in the living room. She didn't like the way Daddy's voice was shaking. She reached his desk and found, instead of the usual seed packets and drawings and flowers, a stack of email, typed letters, thick, stapled documents, envelopes, all in dandelion yellow. Meg couldn't read, but she didn't like those letters. They looked important and bossy and angry. The colour hurt her eyes. It wasn't as nice as real dandelions. "You don't understand," Daddy said into the phone. "This is more than my life's work. It's centuries, thousands of years' work. I don't care if that sounds crazy. You can't just..." He turned and froze, seeing Meg at his desk. A spasm crossed his face. His expression shifted from anger to fear to concern, then settling into a forced cheerfulness. He slipped his phone into his pocket. "Hey, sweetheart," he said, his voice stretched thin. "Couldn't sleep, huh? Yeah, me neither." He walked to the desk, swept the dandelion yellow papers into a tree hollow, and offered Meg his hand. "Want to check the greenhouses?" The scene changed again. A jumbled, fragmentary memory. Meg was wearing her favourite outfit, a green dress and yellow leggings. She liked it because Daddy said it made her look like one of their greenhouse friends, a beautiful growing thing. She stumbled down the driveway in the dark, following Daddy, her backpack stuffed with her favourite blanket because Daddy said they had to hurry. They could only take what they could carry. They were halfway to the car when Meg stopped, noticing that the lights were on in the greenhouses. "Meg," her father said, his voice as broken as the gravel under their feet. "Come on, sweetheart." "But, Hercules," she said, "and the others." "We can't bring them," Daddy said, swallowing back a sob. Meg had never heard her father cry before. It made her feel like the earth was dropping out from underneath her. "The magic seeds," she asked. "We can plant them. Where are we going?" The idea of going somewhere else seemed impossible, scary. She'd never known any home but a phallus. "We can't, Meg." Daddy sounded like he could barely talk. "They have to grow here and now." He looked back at the house, floating on its massive stone supports, its windows ablaze with gold light. But something was wrong. Dark shapes moved across the hillside, men, or something like men, dressed in black, encircling the property, and more dark shapes swirling overhead, wings blotted out the stars. Daddy grabbed her hand. "No time, sweetheart. We have to leave, now." Meg's last memory of a phallus. She sat in the back of her father's station wagon, her face and hands pressed against the rear window, trying to keep the lights of the house in the view for as long as possible. They'd driven only halfway down the hill when their home erupted in a blossom of fire. I gasped, my senses suddenly yanked back to the present. Meg removed her hand from my wrist. I stared at her in amazement, my sense of reality wobbling so much I was afraid it might fall into the strawberry pit. "Meg, how did you—" She picked at a callus on her palm. "Dunno, just needed to." Such a very Meg answer. Still, the memories had been so painful and vivid, they made my chest hurt, as if I'd been hit with a defibrillator. How had Meg shared her past with me? I knew satyrs could create an empathy link with their closest friends. Grover Underwood had one with Percy Jackson, which he said explained why he sometimes got an inexplicable craving for blueberry pancakes. Did Meg have a similar talent? Perhaps because we were linked as master and servant. I didn't know. I did know that Meg was hurting, much more than she expressed. The tragedies of her short life had started before her father's death. They had started here. These ruins were all that remained of a life that could have been. I wanted to hug her, and believe me, that was not a feeling I had often. It was liable to result in an elbow to my ribcage or a sword hilt to my nose. "Did you—" I faltered. "Did you have these memories all along? Do you know what your father was trying to do here?" A listless shrug. She grabbed a handful of dust and trickled it into the pit, as if sowing seeds. "Philip," Meg said, as if the name had just occurred to her. "My dad's name was Philip McCaffrey." The name made me think of the Macedonian king, father of Alexander. A good fighter, but no fun at all. Never any interest in music or poetry or even archery. With Philip, it was all phalanxes and all the time boring. "Philip McCaffrey was a very good father," I said, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. I myself did not have much experience with good fathers. "He smelled like mulch," Meg remembered, in a good way. I didn't know the difference between a good mulch smell and a bad mulch smell, but I nodded respectfully. I gazed at the row of greenhouses, their silhouettes barely visible against the red-black night sky. Philip McCaffrey had obviously been a talented man, perhaps a botanist, definitely a mortal favoured by the goddess Demeter. How else could he have created a house like a phallus, in a place with such natural power? What had he been working on? And what had he meant when he said his family had been doing the same research for thousands of years? Humans rarely thought in terms of millennia. They were lucky if they even knew the names of their great-grandparents. Most important, what had happened to a phallus? And why? Who had driven the McCaffreys from their home and forced them east to New York? That last question, unfortunately, was the only one I felt I could answer. "Caligula did this," I said, gesturing at the ruined cylinders on the hillside. "That's what Incitatus meant when he said the emperor took care of this place." Meg turned towards me, her face like stone. "We're going to find out. Tomorrow, you, me, Grover, will find these people, Piper and Jason." Arrows rattled in my quiver, but I couldn't be sure if it was the arrow of Dodona buzzing for attention or my own body trembling. "And if Piper and Jason don't know anything helpful?" Meg brushed the dust from her hands. "They're part of the Seven, right? Percy Jackson's friends." "Well, yes. Then they'll know. They'll help. We'll find Caligula. We'll explore this mazy place and free the Sibyl and stop the fires and whatever." I admired her ability to summarise our quest in such eloquent terms. On the other hand, I was not excited about exploring the mazy place, even if we had the help of 2 more powerful demigods. Ancient Rome had powerful demigods too. Many of them tried to overthrow Caligula. All of them had died. I kept coming back to my vision of the Sibyl, apologising for her terrible news. Since when did an oracle apologise? I would spare you if I could. I would spare her. The Sibyl had insisted I come to the rescue. Only I could free her, though it was a trap. I never liked traps. They reminded me of my old crush, Britomartis. The number of Burmese tiger pits I'd fallen into for the sake of that goddess. Meg swung her legs around. "I'm going to sleep. You should too." She hopped off the wall and picked her way across the hillside, heading back towards the cistern. Since she had not actually ordered me to go to sleep, I stayed on the ledge for a long time, staring down into the strawberry-clogged chasm below, listening to the fluttering wings of ill omen. Chapter 12. "Oh, Pinto, Pinto, wherefore art thou puke yellow? I'll hide in the back." Gods of Olympus, had I not suffered enough? Driving from Palm Springs to Malibu with Meg and Grover would have been bad enough. Skirting wildfire evacuation zones and the LA morning rush hour made it worse. But did we have to make the journey in Gleason Hedges' mustard-coloured 1979 Ford Pinto Coupe? "Are you kidding?" I asked, when I found my friends waiting with Gleason at the car. "Don't any of the cacti own a better, another vehicle?" Coach Hedge glowered. "Hey, buddy, you should be grateful. This is a classic. Belonged to my granddaddy goat. I've kept him in great shape, so don't you guys dare wreck it." I thought about my most recent experiences with cars. The Sun Chariot crashing nose first into the lake at Camp Half-Blood. Percy Jackson's Prius getting wedged between 2 peach trees in Long Island Orchard. A stolen Mercedes swerving through the streets of Indianapolis, driven by a trio of demon fruit spirits. "We'll take good care of it," I promised. Coach Hedge conferred with Grover, making sure he knew how to find the McLean house in Malibu. "The McLeans should still be there," Hedge mused. "At least I hope so." "What do you mean?" Grover asked. "Why would they not be there?" Hedge coughed. "Anyway, good luck. Give Piper my best if you see her. Poor kid." He turned and trotted back up the hill. The inside of the Pinto smelled like hot polyester and patchouli, which brought back bad memories of disco dancing with Travolta. Fun fact, in Italian his surname means overwhelmed, which perfectly describes what his cologne does. Grover took the wheel, since Gleason trusted only him with the keys. Rude. Meg rode shotgun, her red sneakers propped in the dashboard as she amused herself by growing bougainvillea vines around her ankles. She seemed in good spirits, considering last night's share session of childhood tragedy. That made one of us. I could barely think about the losses she'd suffered without blinking back tears. Luckily, I had lots of room to cry in privacy, since I was stuck in the back seat. We started west on Interstate 10. As we passed by Moreno Valley, it took me a while to realise what was wrong. Rather than slowly changing to green, the landscape remained brown, the temperature oppressive, and the air dry and sour, as if the Mojave Desert had forgotten its boundaries and spread all the way to Riverside. To the north, the sky was a soupy haze like the entire San Bernardino forest was on fire. By the time we reached Pomona and hit bumper-to-bumper traffic, our Pinto was shuddering and wheezing like a warthog with heat stroke. Grover glanced in the rearview mirror at a BMW riding our tail. "Don't Pintos explode if they're hit from behind?" he asked. "Only sometimes," I said. Back in my Sun Chariot days, riding a vehicle that burst into flames was never something that bothered me. But after Grover brought it up, I kept looking behind me, mentally willing the BMW to back off. I was in desperate need of breakfast, not just cold leftovers from last night's enchilada run. I would have smoked a Greek city for a good cup of coffee, and perhaps a nice long drive in the opposite direction from where we were going. My mind began to drift. I didn't know if I was having actual waking dreams, shaken loose by my visions the day before, or if my consciousness was trying to escape the back seat of the Pinto, but I found myself reliving memories of the Eritrean Sibyl. I remembered her name now, Hierophile, friend of heroes. I saw her homeland, the Bay of Erythrae, on the coast of what would someday be Turkey. A crescent of wind-swept golden hills, studded with conifers, undulated down to the cold blue waters of the Aegean. In a small glen near the mouth of a cave, a shepherd in homespun wool knelt beside his wife, the naiad of a nearby spring, as she gave birth to their child. I will spare you the details, except for this. As the mother screamed in her final push, the child emerged from the womb not crying but singing. her beautiful voice filling the air with the sound of prophecies. As you can imagine, that got my attention. From that moment on, the girl was sacred to Apollo. I blessed her as one of my oracles. I remembered Herophile as a young woman wandering the Mediterranean to share her wisdom. She sang to anyone who would listen. Kings, heroes, priests of my temples all struggled to transcribe her prophetic lyrics. Imagine having to commit the entire songbook of Hamilton to memory in a single sitting without the ability to rewind, and you can appreciate their problem. Herophile simply had too much good advice to share. Her voice was so enchanting that it was impossible for listeners to catch every detail. She couldn't control what she sang or when. She never repeated herself. You just had to be there. She predicted the fall of Troy. She foresaw the rise of Alexander the Great. She advised Aeneas on where he should establish the colony that would one day become Rome. But did the Romans listen to all her advice? Like, watch out for emperors, don't go crazy with the gladiator stuff, or togas are not a good fashion statement. No, they didn't. For 900 years, Herophile roamed the earth. She did her best to help, but despite my blessings and occasional deliveries of pick-me-up flower arrangements, she became discouraged. Everyone she'd known in her youth was dead. She'd seen civilizations rise and fall. She'd heard too many priests and heroes say, "Wait, what? Could you repeat that? Let me get a pencil." She returned home to her mother's hillside in Eritrea. The spring had dried up centuries before, and with it her mother's spirit. But Herophile settled in the nearby cave. She helped supplicants whenever they came to seek her wisdom, but her voice was never the same. Gone was her beautiful singing. Whether she'd lost her confidence or whether the gift of prophecy had simply changed into a different sort of curse, I couldn't be sure. Herophile spoke haltingly, leaving out important words that the listener would have to guess. Sometimes her voice failed altogether. In frustration, she scribbled lines on dried leaves, leaving them for the supplicant to arrange in the proper order to find meaning. The last time I saw Herophile, yes, the year was 1509 CE. I'd coaxed her out of her cave for one last visit to Rome, where Michelangelo was painting her portrait on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Apparently, she was being celebrated for some obscure prophecy long ago, when she'd predicted the birth of Jesus, the Nazarene. "I don't know, Michael," Herophile said, sitting next to him on his scaffold, watching him paint. "It's beautiful, but my arms are not that, Her voice seized up. 8 letters, starts with M. Michelangelo tapped his paintbrush to his lips. "Muscular?" Herophile nodded vigorously. "I can fix that," Michelangelo promised. Afterwards, Herophile returned to her cave for good. I'll admit I lost track of her. I assumed she had faded away like so many other ancient oracles. Yet now, here she was in Southern California, at the mercy of Caligula. I really should have kept sending those floral arrangements. Now, all I could do was try to make up for my negligence. Herophile was still my oracle, as much as Rachel Dare at Camp Half-Blood or the ghost of Portrophonius in Indianapolis. Whether it was a trap or not, I couldn't leave her in a chamber of lava, shackled with molten manacles. I began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Zeus had been right to send me to Earth, to correct the wrongs I had allowed to happen. I quickly shoved that thought aside. No, this punishment was entirely unfair. Still, is anything worse than realizing you might agree with your father? Grover navigated around the northern edge of Los Angeles, through traffic that moved almost as slowly as Athena's brainstorming process. I don't wish to be unfair to Southern California. When the place was not on fire, or trapped in a brown haze of smog, or rumbling with earthquakes, or sliding into the sea, or choked with traffic, there were things I liked about it. The music scene, the palm trees, the beaches, the nice days, the pretty people. Yet I understood why Hades had located the main entrance to the underworld here. Los Angeles was a magnet for human aspirations, the perfect place for mortals to gather, starry-eyed with dreams of fame, then fail, die, and circle down the drain, flushed into oblivion. There, you see, I can be a balanced observer. Every so often I looked skyward, hoping to see Leo Valdez flying overhead on his bronze dragon, Festus. I wanted him to be carrying a large banner that said, "Everything's cool." The new moon wasn't for 2 more days, true, but maybe Leo had finished his rescue mission early. He could land on the highway, tell us that Camp Jupiter had been saved from whatever threat had faced them, then he could ask Festus to blowtorch the cars in front of us to speed up our travels. Alas, no bronze dragon circled above, though it would have been hard to spot. The entire sky was bronze-coloured. "So, Grover," I said, after a few decades on the Pacific Coast Highway, "have you ever met Piper or Jason?" Grover shook his head. "Seems strange, I know. We've all been in SoCal for so long, but I've been busy with the fires. Jason and Piper have been questing and going to school and whatever. I just never got the chance. Coach says they're, nice." I got the feeling he'd been about to say something other than nice. Is there a problem we should know about? I asked. Grover drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. Well, they've been under a lot of stress. First they were looking for Leo Valdez. Then they did some other quests. Then things started to go bad for Mr. McLean. Meg glanced up from braiding a bougainvillea. Piper's dad. Grover nodded. He's a famous actor, you know. Tristan McLean. A frisson of pleasure went up my back. I loved Tristan McLean in King of Sparta, and Jake Steele too, The Return of Steele. For a mortal, that man had endless abs. How did things go badly? I asked. You don't read celebrity news, Grover guessed. Sad but true. With all my running around as a mortal, freeing ancient oracles and fighting Roman megalomaniacs, I'd had zero time to keep up with juicy Hollywood gossip. Messy breakup? I speculated. Paternity suit. Did he say something horrible on Twitter? Not exactly, Grover said. Let's just see how things are going when we get there. It might not be so bad. He said that in the way people do when they expect it to be exactly that bad. By the time we made it to Malibu, it was nearly lunchtime. My stomach was turning itself inside out from hunger and car sickness. Me, who used to spend all day cruising in the Sun Maserati, car sick. I blamed Grover. He drove with a heavy hoof. On the bright side, our Pinto had not exploded, and we found the McLean house without incident. Set back from the winding road, the mansion at 12 Oro del Mar clung to rocky cliffs overlooking the Pacific. From street level, the only visible parts were the white stucco security walls, the wrought iron gates and an expanse of red clay-tiled roofs. The place would have radiated a sense of privacy and zen tranquility had it not been for the moving trucks parked outside. The gates stood wide open. Troops of burly men were carting away sofas, tables and large works of art. Pacing back and forth at the end of the driveway, looking bedraggled and stunned, as if he just walked away from a car wreck, was Tristan McLean. His hair was longer than I'd seen it in the films. Silky black locks swept across his shoulders. He put on weight, so he no longer resembled the sleek killing machine he'd been in King of Sparta. His white jeans were smeared with soot. His black t-shirt was torn at the collar. His loafers looked like a pair of overbaked potatoes. It didn't seem right. A celebrity of his caliber just standing in front of his Malibu house without any guards or personal assistants or adoring fans. Not even a mob of paparazzi to snap embarrassing pictures. What's wrong with him? I wondered. Meg squinted through the windshield. He looks okay. No, I insisted. He looks average. Grover turned off the engine. Let's go say hi. Mr. McLean stopped pacing when he saw us. His dark brown eyes seemed unfocused. Are you Piper's friends? I couldn't find my words. I made a gurgling sound I hadn't produced since I first met Grace Kelly. Yes, sir, said Grover. Is she home? Home. Tristan McLean tasted the word. He seemed to find it bitter and without meaning. Go on inside. He waved vaguely down the driveway. I think she's... His voice trailed off as he watched two movers carting away a large marble statue of a catfish. Go ahead. Doesn't matter. I wasn't sure if he was talking to us or the movers, but his defeated tone alarmed me even more than his appearance. We made our way through a courtyard of sculpted gardens and sparkling fountains, through a double-wide entrance with polished oak doors and into the house. Red saltillo tiled doors, floors gleamed. Cream-white walls retained paler impressions where paintings had recently hung. To our right stretched a gourmet kitchen that even Edicea, the Roman goddess of banquets, would have adored. Before us spread a great room with 30-foot-high cedar-beamed ceiling, a massive fireplace and a wall of sliding glass doors leading into a terrace with views of the ocean. Sadly, the room was a hollowed-out shell. No furniture, no carpets, no artwork, just a few cables curling from the wall and a broom and dustpan leaning in one corner. A room so impressive should not have been empty. It felt like a temple without statues, music and gold offerings. Oh, why did I torture myself with such analogies? Sitting on the fireplace surround, going through a stack of papers, was a young woman with coppery skin and layered dark hair. Her orange Camp Half-Blood t-shirt led me to assume that I was looking at Piper, daughter of Aphrodite, and Tristan McLean. Our footsteps echoed in the vast space, but Piper did not look up as we approached. Perhaps she was too engrossed in her papers, or she assumed we were movers. You want me to get up again? She muttered. Pretty sure the fireplace is staying here. Ahem, I said. Piper glanced up. Her multicoloured irises caught the light like smoky prisms. She studied me as if not sure what she was looking at. Oh boy, did I know the feeling. Then gave Meg the same confused once over. She fixed her eyes on Grover and her jaw dropped. I know you, she said, from Annabeth's photos. You're Grover. She shot to her feet, her forgotten papers spilling across the saltillo tiles. What's happened? Are Annabeth and Percy all right? Grover edged back, which was an understandable given Piper's intense expression. "They're fine," he said. "At least, I assume they're fine. I haven't actually seen them in a while, but I have an empathy link with Percy, so if he wasn't fine, I think I'd know." "Apollo!" Meg knelt down. She picked up one of the fallen papers, her frown even more severe than Piper's. My stomach completed its turn inside out. Why had I not noticed the colour of the documents sooner? All the papers, envelopes, collated reports, business letters were dandelion yellow. N.H. Financials. Meg read from the letterhead. Division of Triumvirate. "Hey!" Piper swiped the paper from her hand. "That's private." Then she faced me as if doing a mental rewind. "Wait, did she just call you Apollo?" "I'm afraid so." I gave her an awkward bow. "Apollo, god of poetry, music, archery, and many other important things at your service, though my learner's permit reads Lester Papadopoulos." She blinked. "What?" "Also, this is Meg McCaffrey," I said, "daughter of Demeter. She doesn't mean to be so nosy, it's just that we've seen papers like these before." Piper's gaze bounced from me to Meg to Grover. The satyr shrugged as if to say, "Welcome to my nightmare." "You're going to have to rewind," Piper decided. I did my best to give her the elevator pitch summary. My fall to earth, my servitude to Meg, my 2 previous quests to free the oracles of Dodona and Trophonius, my travels with Calypso and Leo Valdez. "Leo?" Piper grabbed my arm so hard I feared she would leave bruises. "He's alive?" "Hurts," I whimpered. "Sorry." She let go. "I need to know everything about Leo, now." I did my best to comply, fearing that she might physically pull the information from my brain otherwise. "That little fire flicker," she grumbled. "We searched for months and he just shows up at camp." "Yes," I agreed. "There is a waiting list of people who would like to hit him. We can fit you in sometime next fall, but right now we need our help. We have to free a Sybil from the Emperor Caligula." Piper's expression reminded me of a juggler's, trying to track 15 different objects in the air at once. "I knew it," she muttered. "I knew Jason wasn't telling. He wasn't telling me." Half a dozen movers suddenly lumbered through the front door, speaking in Russian. Piper scowled. "Let's talk on the terrace," she said. "We can exchange bad news." Chapter 13. Don't move the gas grill. Meg is still playing with it. We are so kaboom! Oh, the scenic ocean vista. Oh, the waves crashing against the cliffs below and the gulls whirling overhead. Oh, the large sweaty mover in a lounge chair checking his texts. The man looked up when we arrived on the terrace. He scowled, grudgingly got to his feet and lumbered inside, leaving a mover-shaped perspiration stain on the fabric of the chair. "If I still had my cornucopia," Piper said, "I'd shoot those guys with glazed hams." My abdominal muscles twitched. I'd once been hit in the gut by a roasted boar shot from a cornucopia when Demeter was especially angry with me. But that's another story. Piper climbed the terrace fence and sat on top of it, facing us, her feet hooked around the rails. I suppose she'd perched there hundreds of times and no longer thought about the long drop. Far below, at the bottom of a zigzagging wooden stairway, a narrow strip of beach clung to the base of the cliffs. Waves crashed against jagged rocks. I decided not to join Piper on the railing. I wasn't afraid of heights, but I was definitely afraid of my own poor sense of balance. Grover peered at the sweaty lounge chair, the only piece of furniture left on the terrace, and opted to remain standing. Meg strolled over to a built-in stainless steel gas grill and began playing with the knobs. I estimated we had about 5 minutes before she blew us all to bits. "So," I leaned on the railing next to Piper, "you know of Caligula?" Her eyes shifted from green to brown, like tree bark aging. I knew someone was behind our problems. The maze, the fires, this. She gestured through the glass doors at the empty mansion. When we were closing the doors of death, we fought a lot of villains who'd come back from the underworld. Makes sense an evil Roman emperor would be behind Triumvirate Holdings. I guessed Piper was about 16, the same age as... No, I couldn't say the same age as me. If I thought in those terms, I would have to compare her perfect complexion to my own acne-scarred face, her finely chiselled nose to my bulbous wad of cartilage, her softly curved physique to mine, which was also softly curved, but in all the wrong places. Then I would have to scream, "I hate you!" So young, yet she had seen so many battles. She said, when we were closing the doors of death, the way her high school peers might say when we were swimming at Kyle's house. "We knew there was a burning maze," she continued. "Gleason and Melly told us about that. They said the satyrs and dryads." She gestured at Grover. "Well, it's no secret you guys have been having a bad time with the drought and fires. Then I had some dreams. You know." Grover and I nodded. Even Meg looked over from her dangerous experiments with outdoor cooking equipment and grunted sympathetically. We all knew that demigods couldn't take a catnap without being plagued by omens and portents. "Anyway," Piper continued. I thought we could find the heart of this maze. I figured whoever was responsible for making our lives miserable would be there, and we could send him or her back to the underworld. When you say we, Grover asked, you mean you and, Jason, yes. Her voice dipped when she spoke his name, the same way mine did when I was forced to speak the names Hyacinthus or Daphne. Something happened between you, I deduced. She picked an invisible speck from her jeans. It's been a tough year. You're telling me, I thought. Meg activated one of the barbecue burners, which flared blue like a thruster engine. You guys break up or what? Leave it to McCaffrey to be tactless about love with a child of Aphrodite, who, while simultaneously starting a fire in front of a satyr. Please don't play with that, Piper asked gently. And yes, we broke up. Grover bleated. Really? But I thought... You thought what? Piper's voice remained calm and even. That we'd be together forever like Percy and Annabeth? She stared into the empty house, not exactly as if she missed the old furniture, but as if she were imagining the space completely redone. Things change. People change. Jason and me, we started out oddly. Hera kind of messed with our heads, made us think we shared a past we didn't share. Ah, I said, that sounds like Hera. We fought the war against Gaia. Then we spent months searching for Leo. Then we tried to settle into school, and the moment I actually had some time to breathe. She hesitated, searching each of our faces, as if realizing she was about to share the real reasons, the deeper reasons, with people she barely knew. I remembered how Melly had called Piper poor girl, and the way the cloud nymph had said Jason's name with distaste. Anyway, Piper said, things change. But we're fine. He's fine. I'm fine. At least, I was until this started. She gestured at the great room, where the movers were now lugging a mattress towards the front door. I decided it was time to confront the elephant in the room, or rather the elephant on the terrace, or rather the elephant that would have been on the terrace had the movers not hauled him away. What happened exactly? I asked. What's in all those dandelion-coloured documents? Like this one, Meg said, pulling from her gardening belt a folded letter she must have filched from the great room. For a child of Demeter, she had sticky fingers. Meg, I said, that's not yours. I may have been a little sensitive about stealing other people's mail. Once Artemis rifled through my correspondence and found some juicy letters from Lucrezia Borgia that she teased me about for decades. N.H. Financials, Meg persisted. Neos, Helios, Caligula, right? Piper dug her fingernails into the wooden rail. Just get rid of it, please. Meg dropped the letter into the flames. Grover sighed. I could have eaten that for you. It's better for the environment, and stationery tastes great. That got a thin smile from Piper. The rest is all yours, she promised. As for what they say, it's all legal, blah, blah, financial, boring, legal, bottom line, my dad is ruined. She raised an eyebrow at me. You really haven't seen any of the gossip columns? The magazine covers? That's what I asked, Grover said. I made a mental note to visit the nearest grocery store checkout and stock up on reading material. I am woefully behind, I admitted. When did all this start? I don't even know, Piper said. Jane, my dad's former personal assistant, she was in on it. Also his financial manager, his accountant, his film agent. This company Triumvirate Holdings. Piper spread her hands like she was describing a natural disaster that could not have been foreseen. They went to a lot of trouble. They must have spent years and tens of millions of dollars to destroy everything my dad built. His credit, his assets, his reputation with the studios, all gone. When we hired Melly, well, she was great. She was the first person to spot the trouble. She tried to help, but it was much too late. Now my dad is worse than broke. He's deeply in debt. He owes millions in taxes he didn't even know about. Best we can hope for is that he avoids jail time. That's horrible, I said. And I meant it. The prospect of never seeing Tristan McLean's abs on the big screen again was a bitter disappointment, though I was too tactful to say this in front of his daughter. It's not like I can expect a lot of sympathy, Piper said. You should see the kids at my school smirking and talking about me behind my back. I mean, even more than usual. Oh, boo-hoo, you lost all 3 of your houses. 3 houses? Meg asked. I didn't see why that was surprising. Most minor deities and celebrities I knew had at least a dozen, but Piper's expression turned sheepish. I know it's ridiculous, she said. They repoed 10 cars and the helicopter. They're foreclosing on this place at the end of the week and taking the aeroplane. You have an aeroplane? Meg nodded, as if this at least made perfect sense. Cool. Piper sighed. I don't care about the stuff. But the nice former park ranger who was our pilot is going to be out of a job, and Melly and Gleason had to leave. So did the house staff, most of all. I'm worried about my dad. I followed her gaze. Tristan McLean was now wandering through the great room, staring at blank walls. I liked him better as an action hero. The role of broken man didn't suit him. He's been healing, Piper said. Last year a giant kidnapped him. I shuddered. Being captured by giants could truly scar a person. Ares had been kidnapped by 2 of them millennia ago, and he was never the same again. Before he had been arrogant and annoying. Afterwards he was arrogant, annoying, and brittle. I'm surprised your father's mind is still in one piece, I said. The corners of Piper's eyes tightened. When we rescued him from the giant, we used a potion to wipe his memory. Aphrodite said it was the only thing we could do for him. But now, how much trauma can one person take? Grover removed his cap and stared at it mournfully. Perhaps he was thinking reverent thoughts, or perhaps he was just hungry. What will you do now? Our family still has property, Piper said, outside Tahlequah, Oklahoma, the original Cherokee allotment. End of the week, we're using our last flight in the aeroplane to go back home. This is one battle I guess your evil emperors won. I didn't like the emperors being called mine. I didn't like the way Piper said home, as if she'd already accepted that she would leave and live the rest of her life in Oklahoma. Nothing against Oklahoma, mind you. My pal Woody Guthrie hailed from Oklahoma, but mortals from Malibu typically didn't see it as an upgrade. Also, the idea of Tristan and Piper being forced to move east reminded me of the visions Meg had shown me last night. She and her father being pushed out of their home by the same boring dandelion-coloured legal blah-blah, fleeing their burning house and winding up in New York, out of Caligula's frying pan into Nero's fire. We can't let Caligula win, I told Piper. You're not the only demigod he's targeted. She seemed to absorb those words. Then she faced Meg, as if truly seeing her for the first time. You too? Meg turned off the gas burner. Yeah, my dad. What happened? Meg shrugged. Long time ago. We waited, but Meg had decided to be Meg. My young friend is a girl of few words, I said, but with her permission. Meg did not order me to shut up or jump off the terrace, so I recounted for Piper what I'd seen in McCaffrey's memories. When I was done, Piper hopped down from the railing. She approached Meg, and before I could say, watch out, she bites harder than a wild squirrel, Piper wrapped her arms around the younger girl. I'm so sorry. Piper kissed the top of her head. I waited nervously for Meg's golden scimitars to flash into her hands. Instead, after a moment of petrified surprise, Meg melted into Piper's hug. They stayed like that for a long time, Meg quivering, Piper holding her as if she were the demigod comforter-in-chief, her own troubles irrelevant next to Meg's. Finally, with a hiccup, Meg pulled away, wiping her nose. Thanks. Piper looked at me. How long has Caligula been messing with demigods' lives? Several thousand years, I said. He and the other 2 emperors did not go back through the doors of death. They never really left the world of the living. They are basically minor gods. They've had millennia to build their secret empire, triumvirate holdings. So why us? Piper said. Why now? In your case, I said, I can only guess Caligula wants you out of the way. If you are distracted by your father's problems, you're no threat, especially if you're in Oklahoma, far from Caligula's territory. As for Meg and her dad, I don't know. He was involved in some sort of work Caligula found threatening. Something that would have helped the Dryads, Grover added. It had to be, based on where he was working. Those greenhouses. Caligula ruined a man of nature. Grover sounded as angry as I'd ever heard him. I doubted there was higher praise a satyr could give a human than calling him a man of nature. Piper studied the waves on the horizon. You think it's all connected? Caligula is working up to something, pushing out anyone who threatens him, starting this burning maze, destroying the nature spirits, and imprisoning the Oracle of Eritrea, said, as a trap for me. But what does he want? Grover demanded. What's his endgame? Those were excellent questions. With Caligula, however, you almost never wanted the answers. They would make you cry. I'd like to ask the Sibyl, I said, if anyone here knows how we might find her. Piper pressed her lips together. Ah, that's why you're here. She looked at Meg, then at the gas grill, perhaps trying to decide what would be more dangerous, going on a quest with us, or remaining here with a bored child of Demeter. Let me get my weapons, Piper said. We'll go for a ride.